Coincidence? I think not!
Want to watch football without the restrictions of blackouts or cable? Check out expressvpn.com to help you get access to all the live games. Sign up today using the link in the description to get 3 free months.
Yoda Bolt fam, it's the director. Chargers fans, how we feeling, Bolt fam? How's everybody holding up, man? Yesterday's game was absolutely tragic, awful, horrible experience for most Chargers fans, all Chargers fans, in a game that honestly the Chargers, we did understand there was a good risk of dropping this game, that the Seattle Seahawks were not what they looked like on the surface. Honestly, they look like a pretty decent team in 2022, but what really gutted Chargers fans yesterday was the narratives around the loss. The injuries really starting to pile up. We lost J.C. Jackson. We lost Mike Williams. The coaching decisions on top of that, the play calling, everything just fell into this melting pot of despair. And I was upset, man. Yesterday, you saw a rare occasion or a rare instance of director rage on stream, and I told myself, you know what? Just sit back, sleep on it. Figure out your emotions and try and rationalize it for tomorrow's video. And this morning, honestly, I woke up still pretty upset because there's still a lot of things that I think the Chargers need to sort out in this very valuable moment of time, being their bye week. Of course, the Chargers bye week, week 8. It's going to be one of the more important ones that we've seen in a long time in terms of the Chargers. We're still 4-3, but this team does not look like it's 4-3. They can do things to help change this and turn this around, but right now, it's going to take some drastic decision making, because drastic change demands drastic decisions. And I've got my idea of what needs to happen in this video, so we're going to go over a lot of what we saw, a lot of what needs to happen, a lot of what the Chargers must accomplish over the week 8 bye week, and ultimately point out some of the things that this team just plain needs to do better. Before we do get started, guys, shout out to the sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. Of course, if you guys want to get in on the action on Monday Night Football, these are the picks that I'm thinking right now. You guys let me know in the comment section below what you are thinking. Make sure you use code DIRECTOR to match your first deposit up to $100. Before we do kick off, also hit us up with a like and sub if you do enjoy this Chargers content. Small amount of time you guys take to hit the like, sub, and bell notification helps me out a lot. Let's get into this one. Lights, camera, Coach Payton.
Action!
A Chargers coaching crisis. Change is now mandatory. Now, first off, guys, I did want to give you guys a heads up on what's going on in terms of injury. There's a lot of things going on, okay? So before we get into the meat and potatoes, this is what I really need to kind of describe to you guys as one of the perfect storms in what you can find in a game. J.C. Jackson, Mike Williams, Chris Rumpf, these guys definitely banged up in this game. And I wanted to open up this video with the biggest thing that upset me by far in the Sunday matchup versus the Seahawks. This is the biggest decision I took issue with. Of course, this game was one that felt, Chargers fans felt like, oh my gosh, let's get out of here, right? At some point, the game turned so horribly. It was very evident that the offense wasn't going to keep up, and we continued to see our players drop. And that is one of the worst things, in a loss especially, that you could ever see, or your star players go down. Now, going into this game, we had already lost Joey Bosa. Keenan Allen was very limited this game. He may be coming back after the bye week, more than likely. We had Rashawn Slater out, Joshua Kelly out, Donald Parham out. During the game, we lost J.C. Jackson, Mike Williams, and Chris Rumpf. We also saw a lot of other players shaken up, like Justin Herbert, Derwin James, and Drew Tranquill, and even more. The biggest thing that upset me that game was the decision to keep our players in a called game. It was lost. It was so far gone by that point. And for some reason, just like we saw with the Jacksonville Jaguar game, a Justin Herbert fresh off of broken ribs, he stayed in the game there for reasons that I still don't understand. We saw it again on Sunday versus the Seahawks. And this, to me, is egregious. To keep your stars in a situation like that, especially in a game where it seems luck is very much so against you, keeping your stars in is an egregious decision to me. We were at what point? Down 16-37 late in the fourth, and I'm still seeing Justin Herbert out there slinging it. I'm still seeing Khalil Mack out there. It just doesn't make any sense to me, especially after losing all the big players that we did on that day as well. It just doesn't make sense to me, and honestly, it offended me greatly. It is so much, as a matter of fact, I woke up this morning still upset about it. And before we really dig into that a little bit deeper, I really would like you guys to join me in sending our love to our injured players, right? Comment their numbers, 27, 81. I know that Drew Tranquil came back, but we're still missing guys like, 97 and 13 and a whole bunch of them, man. Please share with me in support of the players. We hope that they return very soon. And I also wanted to highlight the player that we're seeing on the screen right now in J.C. Jackson. I know that there's going to be emotions revolving around JC because he just didn't live up to what we hoped he would be in 2022. And ultimately, I blame a lot of that on the scheme. Not the scheme in terms of JC doesn't have a job to adhere to that scheme or to evolve into that scheme. But I feel like we picked up the players that we did for a reason. Right? Asante Samuel Jr., the man corner. Bryce Callahan, the man corner. J.C. Jackson, at the time, the best man corner in football, yet we're sitting out here running soft cover 3, Tampa 2. I just didn't understand that. And in this game, we started to see more of what J.C. Jackson could bring to the table in terms of man press coverage. It was raring up to be a pretty big match between DK Metcalf and J.C. Jackson. And unfortunately, both of them went down in this game. So before we, I don't know. I saw some disrespectful comments all day yesterday in terms of J.C. Jackson's injury. Let's be classy, Bolt fam. For one, he's a human being, he's a player, and he's one that was bouncing back. And for two, in this game in particular, I saw flashes of him making his comeback into the season, him getting comfortable into the season, and Coach Staley using him to his strengths. It was just a little bit too late, right? He started to finally flash his talent, and it was a little bit too late. And unfortunately for JC, a very gruesome-looking injury, a very painful-looking injury. We really hope that he comes back fully healthy sometime maybe this season, if not for a comeback player of the season or a comeback player of the year kind of season next year. So, protect your stars. That is one big thing that really did upset me. And I do not want to see that ever again. And it's one thing that I'm holding very much so against Brandon Staley. Now, speaking of which, this video might be a little bit longer today, guys, because I have a lot of things in my mind that I need to get out. Speaking of which, next thing, Brandon Staley. I think he may have lost the fan base or a good portion of it with this game. And I don't know how much of that truly does fall on him. We did see a lot of decisions that remained consistent from past decisions that were poor, that cost the Chargers in fourth down situations, that cost the Chargers in terms of the team's health a little bit. A lot of the things maybe outside of his control, still a lot of the things were in his control as well. And ultimately, the decision-making that we saw revolving around his coaching staff has also remained consistent and without change. And this is something that ultimately the head coach is going to be responsible for. In terms of keeping your stars protected, right? The one thing I loved about Brandon Staley last year was his attention to injury and playing it safe. There was a game that Joey Bosa went down in, and I would say at least half the time a team would send him back in on those circumstances. It was a concussion or something like that, and I think he was ruled likely to return. But Brandon Staley wanted to play it safe because he knew Joey Bosa's concussion history, and he wanted to make sure that he protected his star. And I don't know, man. That game was proof to me that he had what it takes to keep this team healthy. And this year, though, it just does not feel like that translated into 2022. Keeping your starters in is absolutely so frustrating for me. Doing it twice by week 7, though, is infuriating. And I cannot stand by it. You stack on top of that another couple of instances on his fourth down decisions. It's kind of getting dicey out there. And trust me, guys, this is tough for me. I understand, I guess, the platform that I have here. And I'm most of the time, 99% of the time, want to remain that optimistic guy, right? That rock if I can. But every once in a while, I feel like it's also necessary to just say how it is, right? Tell it how it is. This team needs help. And I think right now it starts with the coaching. My biggest grievance, with keeping the players protected, that definitely is one that set me off. The fourth downs, it's a couple of different things, but ultimately this season isn't shaping up after a tremendous offseason that ultimately should be living up to more at this point. It's just the way we continue to operate and the way we continue to not adjust, not change, that is starting to become frustrating. The Chargers, for instance, they should and they can and they should be successful on fourth downs. They should be a successful fourth down team. Heck, they should be a successful third down team. But for some reason, it feels like we never use the proper personnel that we have on the roster, active on game day, on obvious calls, right? Obvious plays. A good example of that last night, our early fourth down denial, right? It came early in the first quarter, I do believe. And that was after a spectacular Kenneth Murray interception. Instead of what a lot of us would assume the Chargers would do, instead of sneaking it or handing it off to our fullback Xander Horvath, who's been fantastic, or heck, even adding Xander Horvath in as a blocker to help Austin Eckler, instead of all that, we ran up the middle with Eckler again. At this point, I have to ask, do we not have enough tape on this kind of attempt to prove that it's just not going to work? I know that Joe Lombardi is ultimately to blame in terms of running that and maybe even making that decision, but ultimately Staley should step in on these poor play calls, on these poor decisions. He should be the one in those situations to make that call. Maybe he even is. And I feel like we've tried the same thing over and over and over again, and for whatever reason, we just won't adjust. I don't know. Brandon Staley, at this point, he has a lot of work to do to win back the hearts of the fans, because right now it feels like he's spread way too thin and he's starting to make mistakes that ultimately just don't make sense to us, the fans, and our patience ultimately is running out. Now, what's the other coach the Chargers fans have definitely had issue with? Well, let's talk a little bit about Joe Lombardi, the segment called Curtains on the Joe Show. Oh, man. I don't know, man. I feel like I've gone to bat a lot of times for Brandon Staley and Joe Lombardi. Joe Lombardi a lot, because there are things that I think that he's done well. There are things that I think he brought from New Orleans that have worked, and there are a couple of games this season I felt he called pretty well. But ultimately, as the season has gone on, I don't know how much I can do that anymore. Now, Staley is ultimately responsible for what's happening on the offense. Let's not get any, our wires crossed. But Joe Lombardi has the wheel on the offense right now, and he's driving out of control. I feel like there was a plan to create an offense in LA that's very reminiscent to, let's say, New Orleans offense in seasons past. And at Joe Lombardi, he made a lot of sense to bring in to try and make that happen. And it translated. It really did in some ways, like we talked about with Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler, resembling that prime Alvin Kamara, that's something that Joe brought with him from New Orleans, and that did work. But in every other aspect of the offense, it feels like things are being executed very poorly. There's no creativity. There's nothing pushing this team over the edge offensively to make them dangerous in more than just the Austin Eckler part of the offense. Eckler's great, but we cannot lean on him to win us games. He's going to put up great stats regardless, but we need wins at this point. The passing game has really just taken a nosedive this season. Nothing is getting open. I think Austin Eckler's our best receiver at this point. He may even have the most receptions. That's not the way things are supposed to operate. That tells me that there's something seriously wrong with the passing offense, and right now that's on Joe's shoulders, him and Brandon Staley. And this has led to the Chargers, primarily using short passes and receptions taken close, if not behind the line of scrimmage. This is why we are struggling so bad to not even have to reach third down. We're such a struggled third down team because we put ourselves in these situations, and ultimately it comes down to Joe Lombardi's system. Now, these are fine plays, right, in the right circumstances. These, short passes, especially for featuring Austin Eckler, but not 90% of the time, right? It's created a very predictable, bland, and unintimidating offense as a whole, and this is just wrong. This is wrong. It is not working. Now, sure, I do have to say, in Joe's defense, he's working with a lot of setbacks, right? Injuries have just piled up. We're down. We're scraping the bottom of the barrel at wide receiver at the moment. But this is a team that also has Justin freaking Herbert. Injuries cannot be the sole problem, right? Because we have Justin Herbert. In years past, we've seen Herbert elevate receivers like Guyton, Tyron Johnson, Jared Cook, and even a lot of his running backs not named Austin Eckler. And this is why Herbert is so special. And we are squandering his talent with subpar play calling. I feel like with the proper play calling, why not see something similar to what we saw in DeAndre Carter in the preseason? Why not see something similar in Michael Benny? Understand these are depth guys, but it's Justin Herbert. In the right system, with the right confidence, with the right momentum, he can elevate these receivers. And right now, it's just not happening. And I do blame the play calling for the most part. Justin Herbert's confidence is really taking a hit, right? With every 3 and out, with every locked up screen, with every dump off for 2 yards, it's starting to add up and show for Justin Herbert. And somebody said something on Twitter the other day that really resonated with me. Herbert is a Ferrari being driven at 60 miles an hour. And guess who's behind the wheel? That's ultimately what I feel like, man. Ultimately, Joe is responsible for what we're seeing. And yes, we do need more talent, right? We do need help at wide receiver. Maybe the RB2 going out definitely had a pan to play in that as well. And yes, Herbert is banged up. We also have to give him some credit there. Justin Herbert is not 100% right now. But proper coaching and play calling can 100% overcome these obstacles. We've seen it time and time again. I feel like a good example is Mac Jones, right? I think he's an okay quarterback. But when we see Belichick gets his hands on him, it feels like they find a good amount of success. And that's the difference here. We don't need to elevate a poor quarterback or okay or average quarterback. We're trying to maintain an elite quarterback. And that's something that shouldn't be as hard as what we're seeing on Sundays lately. This has also led to a disaster in running the football. I do need to talk about that a little bit. I know the Chargers' passing offense has been really bad, but the Chargers' running offense equally has not been very good. And I do feel like it adds up to the Chargers just not being a very intimidating team. And this Chargers offensive line is one of the best I've seen in a very long time, guys. Before Rashawn Slater, before Corey Linsley, if you guys are just new Chargers fans or whatever, it was really bad for a very long time. Almost the entire Phillip Rivers, tenure in Los Angeles was very poor in terms of offensive line play. And right now, it's one of the best I've ever seen. So why can't we run the football? Well, again, it's because defenses aren't respecting our passing attack. And we're letting them get away with it. Playing close to the line of scrimmage, right, with all those dump-off passes and underneath passes and screens and yada, 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 it creates what? An obvious choice and decision, to play close to the line of scrimmage, for defenses to respect the flats, to respect the lower part of the field. When 90% of our passes are short, that's what you're going to want to do defensively. And this is giving defenders much less space to close when trying to stop the run. Instead of a cornerback, coming, 15 yards deep trying to stop the running back, they're coming in, 5 yards deep trying to stop the running back. And it's creating this funnel of desperation, shoving into Justin Herbert. Now it's all on Justin Herbert's shoulders all of a sudden. We're asking him to do way too much because we lack creativity to spread the coverage around. And that's not right. We have Justin Herbert. He should be helping elevate this offense, but right now it feels like we're caging him. We're closing him in. We're giving him very few options to help free himself from what the defense is consistently showing us week in and week out because of the offense that we're running. It's bad. And ultimately, at this point, my patience for Joe Lombardi, it has run out. I've been trying for a long time. Last season, top 5 offense. We have so many injuries this year, yada, yada, yada. Excuses. I think it's time to move on, like right now, because adjusting is one of the biggest things, the most crucial things that you can do, I would say, as a coach in the NFL, especially as a coordinator. If you're in charge of what happens on that field, you've got to be willing and able to adjust. And right now I'm seeing none of that. Matter of fact, I did want to I'll show you guys one more thing. I ran across this article from 2015. Okay, Lions fire offense coordinator Joe Lombardi. This is something a lot of people have shared with me when presenting their arguments with Joe Lombardi. And we'll just read a couple of things from here that do seem familiar, right? Lombardi's place in Detroit always felt like an awkward fit. He struggled to adapt a Saints-like offense in Detroit based on timing and precision. Matthew Stafford has never mastered the finer points of the position like Breeze and regressed in an offense built around short passing. Does that sound familiar? I think that sounds very familiar to me, at least. And it's a point that I saw a lot of Chargers fans bring up in the chat last night. We may be inadvertently forcing a regression on Justin Herbert with the style of offense that we're pushing on him. There's a lot of things about the New Orleans offense that doesn't revolve mainly on short passing. There's a reason why that Sean Payton and so many years with the New Orleans Saints were very successful. There's a reason why Drew Brees wasn't just known as the dump-off guy. Sure, that was a part of his game, but he was very dangerous no matter what part of the field he was passing to. It just seems that the overall, the big picture, the complete picture of the offense that Joe Lombardi wants to create is not there. And I don't want to put the Chargers in the same situation as the Lions were so many years ago. And we're starting to see history repeat itself a little bit there. I don't know, man. If the Chargers are going to turn the season around, this is 100% the first decision I would personally make, right? The Chargers versus Seattle Seahawks game, this must be the last game for Joe Lombardi as the offensive coordinator of the Bolts. That's the first thing that I would look at. Next up, again, maybe a longer video today. Want to talk a little bit about this man, Tom Telesco. this section called Tom Telesco, A Decade of Woes. Now, we'll touch on the GM just a little bit, right? Because there may be another video that I want to cover with him later on. I personally do love Tom Telesco, the person. Again, I think him and Brandon Staley, they sync very well. They seem like two very intelligent human beings. They like to think analytically, yada, yada, yada. But it's tough to deny that Tom Telesco may be on the hot seat right now as well. Because after 10 seasons as the Chargers GM, right, in and around, we're looking at a record of 73-79 with only 2 playoff wins. 10 season. But the rotating door of subpar coaching hires has probably hurt this team the most, right, outside of what we're seeing. Because I don't mind his drafting for the most part. I think it's been fine. Of course, he's brought a lot of good things via the draft to the Chargers. But putting this team's fate in the hands of guys like Mike McCoy, Anthony Lynn, and now maybe Brandon Staley, depending on how that turns out, that is holding back their potential. Ultimately, a record of good drafts can be wiped away by mismanagement. Right now, I'm kind of seeing that in terms of mismanagement. So and also one big thing, too, that the Chargers, up until recently, have really been missing is mid-season mismanagement, right? Mid-season management. That's also a huge issue. Last year, we saw some good moves, right? Dustin Hopkins, Andre Roberts, as far as special teams, those things were good, but they were also very uncharacteristic. These sorts of pivots are very important to keep a season on track. But the next man up mentality is something that we see constantly on the Chargers. And it's a mentality that can only really carry you so far. At some point, it's going to sink your season. You've got to be willing to go out there and make the adjustments to keep the season on track. Otherwise, all the investments that you made in the offseason, all the moves that you made in the offseason, all the preparation you made in the offseason could go down the drain because we let it too far off the track. Now, again, I won't go too far into it, but Telesco, to me, is probably feeling the pressure right now. 10 seasons is a long time. And if the Chargers fail to win a playoff game or even make it to the postseason in 2022, there's a good bet that Telesco's position will be in danger as well, and I think he knows that. And for this, I think he's going to be forced to make some decisions in the coming weeks. We'll talk a little bit about some of those because I think this is a big part of today's video that we have to talk about. Personnel disaster. The all-in commitment. Okay? I'm not going to show this image for too long, but this is what we're dealing with right now, Bull fam. The Chargers are falling apart via injury. I'll go ahead and switch the image over. Brutal injury for Mike Williams. We hope he returns very, very soon. One of the decisions that Tom Telesco is going to need to make right away is patching the holes on this roster right now. Because it's too late to turn back. This team went all in last offseason, sinking a ridiculous amount of money in signings to push this year. Regardless of injuries, bad coaching, or bad luck, if the Chargers fail despite all of these additions, the season will be considered a failure, right? If we don't make it into the postseason, if we don't win a postseason game, this season is a failure. And I think at this point, Telesco will be forced to make some moves to try and save this season. It's too late to turn back. There's a few moves that I think that he can do to help himself out, though. And it could drastically improve the Chargers' chances to compete this year. In terms of personnel, the very first move you got to make is at wide receiver. Of course, now we are down Mike Williams. We have a hobbled Keenan Allen. We're down a Josh Palmer. Lots of Chargers fans will agree that wide receiver has shot up the list in terms of priority. And in my opinion, if I'm the Chargers, right, and what I've seen with the Chargers as a fan for so many years, it feels like the Bullets will likely turn to free agency for at least one signing, right? Because I expect a couple of signings at wide receiver in the next couple of weeks. The first one, I would expect a relatively unspectacular name, right? One that maybe isn't too recognizable. But that's okay. We need to fill out the depth a little bit. Keep in mind, Odell Beckham Jr. is still out there. Yes, he's a free agent, but I feel like his timing in his return maybe doesn't fit our timeline anymore because we're going to need a new receiver in as soon as week 9. So ultimately, for me, unfortunately, I feel like Odell Beckham Jr. may be off the table. Instead, however, I feel the move that the Chargers can make right now and must make within the next week is going to be via trade. They've got to acquire a solid talent at wide receiver if they're going to survive the rest of this season, especially now with Mike Williams out. My favorite option at the moment is going to be this man right here. Elijah Moore, wide receiver for the New York Jets. And this man, he has recently and very publicly requested a trade out of New York. This is a great situation for a team like the Chargers to pursue from many different angles. Elijah Moore is an extremely talented receiver that is currently being underutilized in New York, and this is the reason why he wants out. He's not getting enough time to play. There's a lot of wide. The New York Jets overloaded on wide receiver, and it's pushed down Elijah Moore down the depth chart so much so that he's really not seeing the field very much, and that's why he wants to move to a system and a team where he will be featured a bit more. Now, the reason I like Elijah Moore so much is that he possesses lightning speed. Not just fast, but very fast. Having ran a 4.34 40 at the combine, he's very good. And this is an element that the Chargers are missing very bad. He's an exceptional route runner. He's versatility in the slot and the outside. He's perfect. He's perfect for what the Chargers need right now. And again, the biggest thing that we've been screaming about all season is the Chargers desperately lack speed on the roster. Moore would be a fantastic featured weapon on this team. But the best part, and that's not even the best part, the best part right now would be his asking price. The former second-round pick has plummeted his trade value with the public request. We've seen this year in and year out. Somebody goes on Twitter, somebody goes on Instagram, they say they want out, and what you would think that player would get, in return as far as draft picks is nowhere near it. I think this summer the Jets had an asking price of like a fourth-round pick for Denzel Mims, if I'm not to be mistaken. And that guy was drafted in the second round as well, I think. And that's, by the way, another wide receiver I would not mind pursuing a trade for. But at this point, you could convince me that the Jets would move on from Elijah Moore for like a fifth-round pick. Maybe a fourth at the most. And it's a price that we should happily pay as Chargers fans. Because the biggest and most advantageous aspect of a trade for Moore is also his contract. Elijah Moore still has 2.5 years left on his rookie deal. That's huge. And the Chargers, who are working with a very tight budget after their offseason spending spree, could really use a wide receiver with these specific details attached. Adding a speed receiver with high upside on a rookie deal at a discounted draft capital price, to me at least, is a no-brainer. And this is one I hope that the Chargers organization is seriously considering, maybe even putting offers on the table for right now before the trade deadline in Week 8. Now, there's also other options like Brandon Cooks, Chase Claypool, Kadarius Toney that we've been talking about. But right now, my biggest preference is going to be Elijah Moore. Maybe Denzel Mims if he's on the table, right? And he also offers size and speed, right? He's got kind of that Mike Williams height to him too. But that's a video for another day. Now, the other positions the Chargers would be wise to strengthen: edge, offensive line, cornerback, maybe defensive line. Again, we'll likely save a lot of these for another video before the trade deadline. But Elijah Moore is one I wanted to highlight big time in this video. Now, next up, we're getting close to the end here, guys. I know it's a pretty long video today, but we got a lot to talk about. This is called the master plan. The master plan of today. Now, what do? Right? With all of these issues, what should the Chargers be doing right now? Well, the Chargers are entering a bye week, right? They've got 2 weeks to sort this issue out, a lot of these issues out. This team really needs a drastic change in and out of the bye week, a different team. But the clock officially started the moment that game ended yesterday. If they're going to make any big moves and big changes and big decisions, they would be wise to do so now, while they have some time to maybe somewhat properly integrate these decisions before going back into live football Week 9. They have time to kind of smooth those things in. Now, the very first move I'm making, if I'm in charge, is firing Joe Lombardi. I'm at that point. The offense just cannot go on like this. The defense has been holding their own okay, but the offense has just been so bad. They're not doing the defense any favors. The offense needs some serious attention. So I think it's time to fire Joe. And in his stead, you'll see this man right here. Charming dude, right? You'll see him. And that man's name is Shane Day. In his stead, I would promote Chargers quarterback coach Shane Day to offensive coordinator. There are few people on this planet that I trust more with this task than Shane Day. He understands Justin Herbert on a level that almost no one could understand. And if there's anyone that could put together an offense that features his strengths, I feel like it's Shane. It's not going to be a sure thing, right? If we fire Joe and elevate Shane Day, it's not going to be a sure thing. It could definitely blow up in our face. But at this point, you got to roll the dice. Things are going nowhere. in the Lombardi scheme. Shane is at least a fresh perspective, a guy that understands the center point of this offense in Justin Herbert. He gives us a shot, and those are dice worth rolling, in my opinion. Shane is also a guy that Justin Herbert trusts, and maybe it would be the first step in gaining his confidence back, Justin Herbert's, because obviously there's a lack of in these last couple of games. So step number 1, fire Joe, elevate Shane Day. Step number 2, I'm going to look Brandon Staley dead in his soul and stamp protect your players on his forehead. Of course, I'm kidding, but the concept remains the same. Okay? The next step I would be doing, yes, is going to be looking for a wide receiver. Me personally, I'm going after Elijah Moore pretty aggressively. I would be willing to part with something like a third if I had to, but I honestly, realistically think a fourth would probably be the max you would pay. Fifth would be in the wheelhouse of realistic possibilities, in my opinion. And again, they're probably going to have to make a couple of moves in terms of bringing in wide receivers, because the only healthy ones we have in the roster right now are DeAndre Carter, Michael Bandy, and a handful of practice squad dudes. You got to go out and get a couple of guys, but I'm going to go get Elijah Moore first. Do it. Right? Do it, Chargers. If we're serious, you got to get me a fast wide receiver with upside. We got to add a guy to the roster, and we kind of need him right now. Do it. Do it, Chargers. Step 1, fire Joe. Step 2, get Elijah Moore. Step 3. Next, I'm going to be moving Brandon Staley away from defensive play calling. I know this one's kind of a shock, okay? We hired Brandon Staley with the idea that he would be in charge of the play calling on defense because supposedly he's a defensive guru, which he kind of was with the Los Angeles Rams. Difference is things just start sinking in. They're not settling in. It's not translating with the Los Angeles Chargers for some reason. And I feel like his energy would be best served somewhere else, more as the big picture guy right now, because it's evident to me that he has spread himself way, way too thin. Let him focus on his own decisions in game while managing both coordinators. The defense would instead be put into the hands of this man, Ronaldo Hill, who at this point should be very familiar with what Brandon Staley wants anyway. Let Staley focus on the big picture things because it's the details that we're getting wrong right now. I feel like he's so caught up in what the defense is doing that he's not making the simple decisions of personnel on fourth down. He's not making the simple decisions in timeouts. He's not making the simple decisions on who do we keep out there on the game when everything has already been called. Right? I need his attention on those aspects of the game, not play calling. And I feel like might as well see if Ronaldo Hill can handle those responsibilities, which I do feel like he can, because he spent enough time with Brandon Staley at this point that he will know what he wants. And again, this lets Staley put more of his attention also on the offense, which is the biggest point of struggle right now for the Chargers at this point of the season. And he'll especially need to be able to become available to a brand new offensive coordinator if he's molding a new guy like Shane Day to actually call the plays. So that's where I'm at. To recap, step 1, fire Joe. Step 2, elevate Shane Day. Step 3, go get some receivers, preferably Elijah Moore. Step 4, take away play calling from Brandon Staley and give it to Ronaldo Hill so that he can manage the other aspects of the game, including more attention to the offense. That's kind of where I'm at right now. And the last thing I would be doing is patch the defense the best I can, mainly by adding another edge player. I think that's one of the biggest things the Chargers need right now, especially with Chris Rumph injured and Van Noy maybe struggling a little bit. The Chargers need to do something. Now, in this situation, you don't need to do something as dramatic, in my opinion. You don't need to go get a guy of, Elijah Moore status. Instead, I wouldn't mind even elevating a guy that we've, liked this offseason. Jamal Davis, Carlo Kemp. I think these guys would be serviceable, maybe just a patch while we're waiting for Bosa to return sometime in November. But that's something that they need to do. So at this point, Staley, there's Carlo Kemp, by the way. Staley on very thin ice with me, as well as Telesco at this point. But these moves, if they were to go about it in some way similar to what I've laid out, again, I'm not the expert. I'm not, who am I? But these are just things that have come to mind for me that need to change. Drastic change demands drastic decisions. And so these are some of the drastic decisions that at least make sense to me. If they can do that, it might help repair some of the damage done to my confidence. And I'm not rooting against Brandon Staley. I want him to figure this out. But we got to be prepared for anything. And at this point, we have to consider the worst case scenario. You guys want to know what the worst case scenario is? The Chargers might sit on their hands and do nothing. We've seen this before. And that is something that, dudes, we are in trouble if that happens outside the bye. In and out of the bye, we look the same. This is a means for disaster. And this is where my last segment comes in. The master plan of tomorrow. Oh, man, I can feel it, dude. Some Chargers fans watching this video, getting their comments ready. We started a fire. But everybody just hold on a second, okay? Because this is probably the biggest segment of this entire video revolves around the photo that you're seeing right now. And yes, that is Sean Payton photoshopped into Chargers coaching gear. And yes, this is a real thing that could happen. So let everybody just take a breath. Let's get through this together, okay? Let me explain. This is where forward thinking begins. In the event that the Chargers do sit on their hands and things don't change. Even though I'm mad at Staley, again, I'm not rooting against him. That would be rooting against my team, and hoping that they fail, and that will never happen. But what I can do is prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Right now, Staley is nosediving in his second season in the league. And although his offseason efforts were very valiant and impressive, his execution has proven very poor. The Chargers have committed a lot of money to this roster this year. And for the further, 3 to 5 years, these contracts. This team is going to look very similar for the next few years at least. And this team can't run with this roster and a coach they lack confidence in going into the future. This is where we can start entertaining the idea of Sean Payton to the Bolts. Now, let me be clear. I do not in any way think that the Chargers would pursue, let's say, a firing of Brandon Staley in the middle of the season and go hire a Sean Payton. I think there's just too many complications there. You'd have to get Sean Payton to uproot his entire life and on the Chargers, whim, come in and start coaching football again. This man is retired. There's also the talk about draft picks and things that would need to be exchanged to the New Orleans Saints to make that happen. Of course, I will tell you guys just a quick side note. Whatever it is, it's worth it. I promise. Most trades that I have seen for coaches, most of the time they work out because that coach is worth it. In that instance with Sean Payton, I would be okay with that. Okay? That's beside the point. Now, if you don't already know, Sean Payton wants to come out of retirement. And the Chargers are one of the few teams that he would be very interested in coaching. As a matter of fact, it seems that the Chargers might be at the top of this man's list, which is very, very crazy to me. He's been very vocal about the Chargers season and their coaching decisions as a whole these past few weeks, as well as even attending our games in person to watch for himself. I don't want to speculate too much, guys, but this seems like something Coach Payton is very serious about. This man wants to coach the Los Angeles Chargers. And again, this is not a reason to root against Brandon Staley, not at all. But it's something that you could look at in terms of forward thinking. It's hard to blame Sean Payton for wanting to coach this team. This team has Justin Herbert and a ridiculous amount of star power behind it. And if there's a team worth coming out of retirement for, it's going to be the Bolts. And at this point, I got to tell you guys, if things continue the way that they've been going, if we get to the later half of the season and this team misses the postseason, if this team even gets into the postseason, doesn't win a game, because you can miraculously make it in, but if you falter easily, if you bend and break easily in your first game in the playoffs, if these things come to pass, I feel like I'm on board with the Sean Payton idea. Because I've come to realize that one of the biggest aspects missing from the Chargers coaching staff over these very many years has really been experience. Sean Payton is a decorated head coach with a record of 152-89 over 15 seasons with the Saints. 152 wins to 89 losses. That's major. He's been a consistent playoff contender, winning 9 postseason games, as well as winning a Super Bowl. This man has what we call pedigree, and it's something that this roster would benefit tremendously from. But the thing I want most from Sean Payton, beyond his record, beyond his experience, his name, his hype value, is his commitment to adjustments. Sean Payton did have Drew Brees. Yes, I will give you that. But there are several seasons that team, the New Orleans Saints, was not a good team on paper. They were missing very many pieces to a complete team. Also remember that Drew Brees was not considered a prototypical quarterback either. And he also carried with him major injury risk. But despite this, Sean Payton was able to find a way to stay competitive, even in those seasons, and even with the question marks around Drew Brees. I don't know. He was able to, identifying and leaning into the team's strengths while leveling up and creating, creative, ways to hide his weaknesses. It just felt like he had it put together.
And yes, I do credit Sean Payton as a big reason to why Drew Brees was such a major success with the Saints as well. He's the reason why Taysom Hill has been utilized the way he has been. He's the reason that Taysom Hill is even a thing. He's the reason why their defensive culture still has remained to this day very strong. He even led a quarterback room consisting of what? Jameis Winston and Trevor Siemian to a winning record in his final year as a head coach. There are a lot of things that Sean Payton brings to the table, but his ability to adjust on the fly and create impressive schemes revolving around the strengths of his team, that is what shocks me the most. This is what I feel it takes in terms of leadership to take a football team from something that already looks really good to Super Bowl victors. I'll likely do a separate video on Sean Payton later. This is something I do want to cover in more detail. This is a more broad video, even though it's like 40 minutes long at this point. But I do have to say, if this offseason fails, right, what the Chargers accomplished this offseason, if this season is ultimately a failure, if the Chargers can't win a playoff game, and God forbid if they miss the postseason altogether, if this team cannot get it together under Brandon Staley, they got to prepare to make a big move at head coach that carries the experience to help them reach new heights and understands how to utilize these superstars and figure it out from there. I don't know, man. At this point, I got to tell you guys, I told you yesterday, I'm not going to make any declarations on my opinion while I'm angry. But this morning I woke up, I came down, I wrote my notes, and I realized that what Sean Payton brings to the table is something that I haven't seen the Chargers, hoist in a very, very long time. They haven't featured experience in a very, very long time at head coach. And this is something where if you get the right fit, it could take even a bad team like the New York Giants and turn them into a good team with Brian Dable. Imagine what a guy like Sean Payton can do with the roster of the Los Angeles Chargers. And that's all I'm going to say on that topic. We'll cover a lot of what we talked about in this video in more depth in future videos, but I wanted to get a wide perspective view of what my thoughts are after such a disastrous game yesterday before we go into further detail, because the bye week, it is kind of fun for me. It's a chance to take your breath, take a wide perspective look at what's going on, and have time to really tackle them in terms of those talking topics. And I do intend on doing that. So we will be talking about Sean Payton again. We will be talking about Elijah Moore and potential ads for the Chargers during the bye week and trades and stuff like that. We will be talking a little bit more about the coaching staff, but I feel like my emotion and my opinion on that has really been set forth in this video. That was the main focus of this video, was my thoughts on the coaching. So guys, this is a very long video today. I understand that. Thank you to anybody who stuck around this long. If you did enjoy this content, hit us up with a like and sub on your way out. But it's a lot to think about. So please, this is a conversation that we're having. We're not making declarations. We're not saying this is right and this is wrong. We're having a conversation because ultimately this team needs a lot of help. And it's going to take a lot of expertise from a lot of different people and a lot of tough decisions in order to make it out the bye week the other side and try and get this team back on track. Because right now it's in a bad way. And the tough decisions, that's the way you get back on track. And we've got to make those tough decisions. But which tough decisions are the right calls? You guys let me know what you think in the comment section below about everything. The wide receivers, Sean Payton, the coaching as it is, Joe Lombardi, Shane Day, everything. We covered so much in this video. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me. This has been The Director. Again, hit us up with a like and sub on your way out if you did enjoy this content. We'll see you next time. And as always, bolt up and stay frosty. Sean Payton to the Chargers. Director has finally come around.